Hello and welcome. Tonight, we step gently into one of the most enchanting fairy tales ever told. There's nothing you need to do right now. Just settle in, breathe a little slower, and let the day drift away. If this space brings you comfort, you're always welcome to stay by liking the video or subscribing, but only if it truly feels right to you. I love knowing where these stories travel, so if you wish, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time the night has reached for you. Now lower the lights, let a soft sound fill the room, and allow yourself to be carried slowly, calmly into tonight's story. Snow White and Rose Red. There was once a poor widow who lived alone with her 2 children in a small, lonely cottage at the edge of a great forest. The cottage stood quietly among the trees, and in front of it lay a little garden, neat and carefully tended, where 2 rose trees grew side by side. One bore roses as white as fresh-fallen snow, and the other roses as red as glowing embers. The widow loved these trees dearly, for they reminded her of her 2 daughters who were as unlike and yet as closely bound together as the roses themselves. The elder child was called Snow White, and the younger Rose Red. Snow White was gentle and thoughtful, with a quiet manner that made her seem older than her years. She liked best to sit beside her mother to help with the housework, or to read aloud when the spinning wheel was silent and there was nothing else to be done. Rose Red, on the other hand, was lively and fearless. She delighted in running through the meadows, gathering wildflowers, climbing hills, and chasing butterflies, until her cheeks glowed as brightly as the roses that gave her her name. Yet, different as they were, the 2 sisters loved one another with all their hearts. Wherever they went hand in hand. When Snow White said, "We will never leave each other," Rose Red would answer at once, "Never as long as we live." And their mother, who heard this often, would add gently, "Whatever one has, she must share with the other." These words were not spoken in vain, for the children never quarreled and never begrudged each other anything, whether it was a crust of bread or the last ripe berry on the bush. Often they wandered together into the forest, which lay so near their home that it seemed almost a part of their daily life. They gathered strawberries and red berries beneath the trees, and no harm ever came to them. The wild creatures of the forest trusted the children as if they felt that no evil dwelt in their hearts. Little hares would eat cabbage leaves from their hands, the roe deer grazed peacefully beside them, and the stag leapt merrily past without fear. Birds perched upon the branches above their heads and sang whatever songs they knew, while the sisters listened as though the forest itself were telling them stories. If it happened that they stayed too long among the trees and night came on before they could return home, they were not afraid. They laid themselves down close together upon the soft moss and slept calmly until morning. Their mother knew this, and though she loved them dearly, she felt no distress, for she trusted both her children and the unseen powers that seemed to guard them. Once, when the sisters had passed the night in the forest and the first light of dawn awoke them, they saw a beautiful child sitting near them. He wore a shining white garment that glimmered softly in the early light. He rose, looked kindly at them without speaking, and then walked away into the forest, soon disappearing among the trees. When Snow White and Rose Red stood up and looked around, they saw with wonder and fear that they had been sleeping very close to a steep precipice. Had they taken only a few steps further in the darkness, they would surely have fallen into it. When they told their mother of this, she said with reverence that it must have been the angel who watches over good children. The little cottage was always kept so neat and orderly that it was a pleasure to look upon it. In summer, Rose Red took care of the household work early in the morning so that her mother might rest a little longer. She gathered fresh flowers and laid a wreath beside her mother's bed, placing within it one white rose and one red. In winter, Snow White rose before daylight, lit the fire, and hung the kettle on the hook above the hearth. The kettle was of copper, and she polished it so carefully that it shone like gold. In the evenings, when snowflakes fell softly outside and the wind sighed around the cottage, the mother would say, "Go, Snow White," and bolt the door. Then they sat together by the warm hearth. The mother put on her spectacles and read aloud from a large old book while the girls listened quietly and spun their flax. A little lamb lay resting on the floor beside them, and behind them, upon a perch, sat a white dove, its head tucked peacefully beneath its wings. Everything in the room seemed filled with warmth and calm. One evening, as they were sitting thus in comfort and silence, someone knocked at the door. The knock was heavy and slow, as if the visitor were tired and cold. "Quick, Rose!" Red said. The mother opened the door. It must be a traveler seeking shelter from the weather. Rose Red sprang up and pushed back the bolt, thinking to see a poor man standing outside. But instead, a great black bear stretched his broad head into the room. Rose Red screamed and jumped back. The lamb bleated, the dove fluttered from its perch, and Snow White hid herself behind her mother's bed. But the bear spoke in a deep, gentle voice and said, "Do not be afraid. I mean you no harm. I am half frozen and only wish to warm myself a little by your fire." "Poor bear," said the mother kindly, "lie down by the hearth, but take care not to burn your coat." Then she called, "Snow White, Rose Red, come out. The bear means well and will not hurt you." The sisters came forward timidly, and soon the lamb and the dove also grew calm again. The bear asked the children to knock the snow from his coat, and they fetched the broom and swept his thick fur clean. He stretched himself by the fire and growled softly with comfort. Before long, they were no longer afraid. They played with him, tugged at his hair, rolled him gently about, and tapped him with a hazel switch. When they were too rough, he laughed and called out, "Leave me alive, you children dear, Snowy White and Rosy Red here." When bedtime came, the bear lay down by the hearth, and at dawn the sisters let him out into the forest. From that day on, he returned every evening at the same hour, and the doors were never fastened until their black friend had arrived. When spring came and the snow melted away, the forest grew green again, and fresh grass sprang up beneath the trees. The bear said one morning to Snow White, "Now, I must go away and cannot come back for the whole summer." Snow White felt a sudden sadness at these words. "Where are you going, dear bear?" she asked. "I must go into the forest," he replied, "and guard my treasures from the wicked dwarfs. In winter, when the earth is frozen hard, they must stay below ground and cannot work their way through. But now, when the sun has warmed and softened the soil, they break out of their caves to steal whatever they can lay their hands on. What once falls into their possession seldom sees daylight again. Snow White sighed, for she had grown fond of their strange guest. When she unbolted the door for him, the bear hurried out. But as he passed through, he caught against the bolt, and a piece of his shaggy coat was torn away. For a moment, it seemed to Snow White as though something bright and golden shone beneath the fur. But before she could look more closely, the bear was gone and soon disappeared among the trees. Not long after this, the mother sent Snow White and Rose Red into the forest to gather firewood. As they walked, they heard a strange sound and soon came upon a large tree that lay felled upon the ground. Close by the trunk, something was jumping backward and forward in the grass. At first, they could not tell what it was, but when they came nearer, they saw a dwarf with an old withered face and a snow-white beard a yard long. The end of the beard was fast caught in a cleft of the tree, and the little man was leaping about helplessly like a dog tied to a rope. He glared angrily at the girls with his fiery red eyes and cried, "Why do you stand staring there? Can you not come and help me?" "What has happened to you, little man?" asked Rose Red. "You stupid prying goose," snarled the dwarf. "I was splitting the tree to get a little wood for cooking. Such thick logs are no use to us. We need only small bits for our food burns quickly." I had driven the wedge safely in when the accursed wood suddenly sprang asunder and caught my beautiful white beard. Now I am held fast, and you stand there laughing. The children tried with all their strength to pull the beard free, but it was caught too firmly. "I will run and fetch someone to help," said Rose Red. "You senseless goose," screamed the dwarf. "Why should you fetch anyone? You are already too many. Can you not think of something better?" "Do not be so impatient," said Snow White gently. She took a pair of scissors from her pocket and carefully cut off the end of the beard. As soon as the dwarf felt himself free, he seized a bag of gold that lay among the roots of the tree and swung it upon his back. "Clumsy, uncouth people," he muttered, "to cut off a piece of my fine beard. Bad luck attend you." And without a word of thanks, he went away. Some time later, Snow White and Rose Red went to the brook to catch a fish for their supper. As they drew near the water, they saw something jumping about on the bank as though it were trying to leap into the stream. They ran up and found it was the dwarf once more. "Where are you going?" cried Rose Red. "You surely do not mean to jump into the water." "I am not such a fool," shrieked the dwarf. "Do you not see that the accursed fish is trying to drag me in?" He had been sitting there fishing, and the wind had twisted his beard about the fishing line. At that moment, a large fish had bitten, and the dwarf, being weak, could not pull it out. The fish tugged him toward the water, and though he clung to reeds and rushes, he was in great danger of being dragged in. The girls held him fast and tried to free his beard, but it was so tightly tangled that nothing could be done. At last, Snow White took out her scissors again and cut off another piece of the beard. The dwarf screamed with rage. "Is that civil, you clumsy toadstools, to disfigure one's face? Was it not enough to clip off the end before? Now you have cut off the best part of it. I cannot show myself to my people. I wish you had run the soles off your shoes." He seized a sack of pearls that lay among the rushes and dragged it away without another word. Soon after this, the mother sent the children to the town to buy needles, thread ribbons, and lace. The road led across a wide heath where great pieces of rock lay scattered about. As they crossed it, they noticed a large bird hovering high in the air, circling slowly above them. It sank lower and lower until at last it swooped down near a rock not far away. They then heard a loud cry. Running toward the sound, they saw with horror that an eagle had seized the dwarf and was trying to carry him off. Full of pity, the children caught hold of the little man and pulled with all their might. After a long struggle, the eagle let go and flew away. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from his fright, he screamed, "Could you not have done it more carefully? You have torn my coat and filled it with holes, you clumsy creatures." He picked up a sack full of precious stones and crept away under the rock into his cave. The girls, who were now used to his thanklessness, went quietly on to the town and did their errands. When evening came, they set out for home again and crossed the heath once more. As they passed near the rocks, they saw the dwarf sitting on a clean spot of ground where he had emptied his bag of precious stones. The evening sun shone upon them so that they glittered and sparkled in all colors. The children stopped in wonder to look at them. "What are you staring at?" cried the dwarf angrily, and his ashen face grew red with rage. He was beginning to curse them again when a deep growl was heard, and a black bear came trotting out of the forest toward them. The dwarf sprang up in terror, but he could not reach his cave in time. In his fear he cried out, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare my life. I will give you all my treasures. Look at the beautiful jewels lying there." "What do you want with such a slender little fellow as I? You would not feel me between your teeth. Take these 2 wicked girls instead. They are tender and fat. For mercy's sake, eat them." The bear paid no heed to his words. He lifted his paw and struck the dwarf a single blow. The wicked creature fell down and never moved again. Snow White and Rose Red ran away in fright, but the bear called after them, "Do not be afraid. Wait for me. I will go with you." When spring came and the snow melted away, the forest grew green again, and fresh grass sprang up beneath the trees. The bear said one morning to Snow White, "Now I must go away and cannot come back for the whole summer." Snow White felt a sudden sadness at these words. "Where are you going, dear bear?" she asked. "I must go into the forest," he replied, "and guard my treasures from the wicked dwarfs. In winter, when the earth is frozen hard, they must stay below ground and cannot work their way through. But now, when the sun has warmed and softened the soil, they break out of their caves to steal whatever they can lay their hands on. What once falls into their possession seldom sees daylight again." Snow White sighed, for she had grown fond of their strange guest. When she unbolted the door for him, the bear hurried out. But as he passed through, he caught against the bolt, and a piece of his shaggy coat was torn away. For a moment, it seemed to Snow White as though something bright and golden shone beneath the fur. But before she could look more closely, the bear was gone, and soon disappeared among the trees. Not long after this, the mother sent Snow White and Rose Red into the forest to gather firewood. As they walked, they heard a strange sound and soon came upon a large tree that lay felled upon the ground. Close by the trunk, something was jumping backward and forward in the grass. At first, they could not tell what it was, but when they came nearer, they saw a dwarf with an old withered face and a snow-white beard 1 yard long. The end of the beard was fast caught in a cleft of the tree, and the little man was leaping about helplessly like a dog tied to a rope. He glared angrily at the girls with his fiery red eyes and cried, "Why do you stand staring there? Can you not come and help me?" "What has happened to you, little man?" asked Rose Red. "You stupid prying goose," snarled the dwarf. "I was splitting the tree to get a little wood for cooking. Such thick logs are no use to us. We need only small bits, for our food burns quickly." I had driven the wedge safely in when the accursed wood suddenly sprang asunder and caught my beautiful white beard. Now I am held fast, and you stand there laughing. The children tried with all their strength to pull the beard free, but it was caught too firmly. "I will run and fetch someone to help," said Rose Red. "You senseless goose," screamed the dwarf. "Why should you fetch anyone? You are already too many. Can you not think of something better?" "Do not be so impatient," said Snow White gently. She took a pair of scissors from her pocket and carefully cut off the end of the beard. As soon as the dwarf felt himself free, he seized a bag of gold that lay among the roots of the tree and swung it upon his back. "Clumsy, uncouth people," he muttered, "to cut off a piece of my fine beard, bad luck attend you." And without a word of thanks, he went away. Some time later, Snow White and Rose Red went to the brook to catch fish for their supper. As they drew near the water, they saw something jumping about on the bank, as though it were trying to leap into the stream. They ran up and found it was the dwarf once more. "Where are you going?" cried Rose Red. "You surely do not mean to jump into the water." "I am not such a fool," shrieked the dwarf. "Do you not see that the accursed fish is trying to drag me in?" He had been sitting there fishing, and the wind had twisted his beard about the fishing line. At that moment, a large fish had bitten, and the dwarf, being weak, could not pull it out. The fish tugged him toward the water, and though he clung to reeds and rushes, he was in great danger of being dragged in. The girls held him fast and tried to free his beard, but it was so tightly tangled that nothing could be done. At last, Snow White took out her scissors again and cut off another piece of the beard. The dwarf screamed with rage. "Is that civil, you clumsy toadstools, to disfigure one's face? Was it not enough to clip off the end before? Now you have cut off the best part of it. I cannot show myself to my people. I wish you had run the soles off your shoes." He seized a sack of pearls that lay among the rushes and dragged it away without another word. Soon after this, the mother sent the children to the town to buy needles, thread ribbons, and lace. The road led across a wide heath where great pieces of rock lay scattered about. As they crossed it, they noticed a large bird hovering high in the air, circling slowly above them. It sank lower and lower until at last it swooped down near a rock not far away. They then heard a loud cry. Running toward the sound, they saw with horror that an eagle had seized the dwarf and was trying to carry him off. Full of pity, the children caught hold of the little man and pulled with all their might. After a long struggle, the eagle let go and flew away. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from his fright, he screamed, "Could you not have done it more carefully? You have torn my coat and filled it with holes, you clumsy creatures." He picked up a sack full of precious stones and crept away under the rock into his cave. The girls, who were now used to his thanklessness, went quietly on to the town and did their errands. When evening came, they set out for home again and crossed the heath once more. As they passed near the rocks, they saw the dwarf sitting on a clean spot of ground where he had emptied his bag of precious stones. The evening sun shone upon them so that they glittered and sparkled in all colors. The children stopped in wonder to look at them. "What are you staring at?" cried the dwarf angrily, and his ashen face grew red with rage. He was beginning to curse them again when a deep growl was heard, and a black bear came trotting out of the forest toward them. The dwarf sprang up in terror, but he could not reach his cave in time. In his fear he cried out, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare my life. I will give you all my treasures. Look at the beautiful jewels lying there. What do you want with such a slender little fellow as I? You would not feel me between your teeth. Take these 2 wicked girls instead. They are tender and fat. For mercy's sake, eat them." The bear paid no heed to his words. He lifted his paw and struck the dwarf a single blow. The wicked creature fell down and never moved again. Snow White and Rose Red ran away in fright, but the bear called after them, "Do not be afraid. Wait for me. I will go with you." Snow White and Rose Red stood still when they heard the bear's familiar voice. Though their hearts were still beating fast, they trusted him and waited until he came up to them. As he drew near, he shook himself, and suddenly the bearskin slipped from his body and fell to the ground. In its place stood a tall, handsome man clothed all in gold with kind eyes and a noble bearing. "I am a king's son," he said. "That wicked dwarf stole my treasures and bewitched me so that I was forced to wander through the forest in the form of a savage bear. Only by his death could the spell be broken. Now he has received the punishment he deserved." The sisters listened in wonder, and their fear vanished at once. They recognized in the prince the gentle friend who had shared their hearth through the long winter evenings. He thanked them warmly for their kindness, telling them that their goodness had comforted him even while the enchantment still held him fast. Together, they returned to the cottage where the mother was waiting anxiously for her children. When she saw them arrive in safety and heard the prince's story, she thanked God with all her heart. The prince asked leave to remain with them for a time, and the widow gladly welcomed him, for she had always known him as a faithful and kindly guest. Not long after this, the prince sent messengers to his kingdom and had his great treasures brought out of the dwarf's cave. Gold, pearls, and precious stones were carried away, and the forest seemed lighter and freer now that the wicked creature's power was gone. In time, the prince asked Snow White to be his wife. She agreed with a quiet happiness that suited her gentle nature. Soon afterward, his brother, who had come to visit him, saw Rose Red and loved her for her bright spirit and fearless heart. She too returned his affection gladly. The weddings were celebrated with great joy. Snow White was married to the prince, and Rose Red to his brother. Though the ceremonies were splendid, the sisters remained the same in heart as they had always been, kind, modest, and mindful of one another. They shared the great treasure between them, but neither wished for more than the other. The old mother went to live with her children, and her days passed peacefully and happily. She brought with her the 2 rose trees from the garden of the little cottage, and they were planted beneath her window. Every year they bore the most beautiful roses, white and red, as if to remind her always of her 2 daughters whose love for each other had never changed. And so they all lived contentedly, honored and beloved and the memory of their kindness was long remembered throughout the land. The Golden Key. In the winter-time, when deep snow lay heavily upon the ground and the world seemed hushed beneath its white cover, a poor boy was forced to go out on a small sledge to fetch wood. The cold bit sharply at his hands and face, and each breath rose like smoke into the frozen air. When he had gathered the wood together and packed it carefully, he felt so numb with cold that he wished not to go home at once, but to light a fire and warm himself a little before returning. He scraped away the snow where he stood, moving slowly with stiff fingers, and as he cleared the ground, he discovered a tiny key made of gold. It shone faintly against the dark earth as if it did not belong to the winter around it. Then he thought that where the key was, the lock must surely be also. Encouraged by this thought, he dug further into the frozen ground and soon found an iron chest, old and firmly closed. If the key does but fit it, thought the boy, there must be precious things inside that little box. He searched the chest carefully, yet at first could find no keyhole at all. At last, he discovered one so small that it was hardly visible to the eye. He tried the tiny key, and it fitted exactly. He turned it once around slowly and with care, and now we must wait until he has quite unlocked it and lifted the lid, and then we shall learn what wonderful things were lying hidden in that box. Godfather Death. A poor man had 12 children, and though he worked day and night without rest, he could barely provide them with the simplest food. His hands were never idle, yet his poverty never lessened. When the 13th child was born, his strength and hope were exhausted alike. He stood beside the cradle and looked at the newborn, knowing that he had nothing left to give. In his distress, he resolved to go out onto the highway and ask the first being he met to stand as godfather, for he believed that fate itself must decide what he no longer could. As he walked along the road, the first to meet him was God himself. God spoke kindly and said, "Poor man, I pity you. I will be your child's godfather. I will care for him and make him happy on earth." The man looked at him and asked, "Who are you?" "I am God," was the answer. The man shook his head. "Then I do not wish to have you for a godfather," he said. "You give to the rich and allow the poor to starve." Thus spoke the man in his bitterness, not understanding how wisely wealth and poverty are divided. He turned away and continued down the road. Soon afterward, another figure approached him. It was the devil, who smiled and spoke smoothly. "What are you seeking?" he asked. "If you take me as your child's godfather, I will give him gold in abundance and all the pleasures of the world." The man asked, "Who are you?" "I am the devil." "I do not wish to have you for a godfather," said the man. "You deceive mankind and lead them astray." Without hesitation, he went on his way once more. Before long, a third figure came toward him, walking slowly on withered legs. It was Death. His face was pale and expressionless, and his voice was calm as he said, "Take me as your child's godfather." The man asked, "Who are you?" "I am Death." He replied, "Who makes everyone equal." Then the man considered his words and said, "You are the right one. You take away the rich as well as the poor without distinction. You shall be my child's godfather." Death answered, "I will make your child rich and famous, for he who has me as a friend cannot fail." "Next Sunday is the baptism," said the man. "Be there on time." Death appeared as promised and stood as Godfather in a proper and orderly manner. Nothing about him distinguished the occasion, yet his presence marked the child's fate. Years passed, and the boy grew to manhood. One day, his godfather appeared before him and asked him to come along. He led him deep into the forest where few people ever went, and there showed him an herb growing quietly among the plants. "Now you shall receive your gift," said Death. "I will make you a famous physician. Whenever you are called to a sick person, I will appear to you. If I stand at the sick person's head, you may say with confidence that the patient can be cured. Give him some of this herb and he will recover. But if I stand at the sick person's feet, he is mine, and you must say that no physician in the world can save him." Then Death added in a stern voice, "Beware of using this herb against my will. Should you do so, something very bad will happen to you." The young man listened carefully and accepted the gift without question. It was not long before he became the most famous physician in the world. People said of him that he needed only to look at the sick to know their fate, whether they would recover or were destined to die. Word of his skills spread far and wide, and people came from distant places to seek his help. They brought him to their sick beds and rewarded him generously. In a short time, the physician became a wealthy man, respected and feared for the certainty of his judgment. Now it came to pass that the king of the land fell seriously ill. His condition worsened from day to day, and none of his physicians could offer him hope. At last, the famous doctor was summoned to the palace and commanded to say whether the king might recover. When the physician approached the royal bed, he saw at once that Death was standing at the sick man's feet. According to the law, he had been taught the king now belonged to Death, and no herb on earth could save him. For a moment, the physician stood silent. Then a thought entered his mind. "If I could deceive Death just once," he said to himself, "he will surely be angry. But because I am his godson, he may overlook it." Without further hesitation, he seized the king and turned him around so that Death now stood at the head of the bed. Then he gave the king some of the herb. The medicine worked at once, and the king recovered and soon became strong and healthy again. Not long afterward, Death appeared before the physician. His face was dark, and he raised his finger in warning. "You have betrayed me," he said. "This time I will overlook it, because you are my godson. But if you dare to do such a thing again, it will cost you your neck, and I will take you yourself away with me." The physician bowed his head and promised obedience. Soon after this, the king's daughter became gravely ill. She was his only child, and he loved her more than his own life. Day and night, he wept beside her bed until his eyes grew dim and despair filled the palace. In his distress, the king proclaimed that whoever could rescue his daughter from death should become her husband and inherit the crown. When the physician was brought to the princess's chamber, he found her pale and lifeless, lying quietly as if already claimed by the grave. As soon as he stepped closer, he saw Death standing at her feet. He should have remembered the warning he had received, but the sight of the princess stirred his heart. Her beauty was great, and the promise of becoming her husband and king blinded him to all caution. He did not notice that Death was looking at him angrily, nor that he lifted his withered hand and threatened him in silence. The physician lifted the princess and turned her, so that her head lay where her feet had been. Then he gave her some of the herb. At once her cheeks turned red, and life returned to her body. She opened her eyes and breathed again. The king rejoiced beyond measure, and the court celebrated the physician as a savior. But Death, seeing that he had been cheated a second time, approached the physician with long strides. "You are finished," he said. "Now it is your turn." Death seized him with his ice-cold hand so firmly that he could not resist and led him away. They descended into an underground cavern deep beneath the earth. There the physician saw thousands and thousands of candles burning in endless rows. Some were large, others medium-sized, and others very small. At every moment some went out, and others were relit, so that the flames flickered constantly. "These are the lifelights of mankind," said Death. "The large ones belong to children, the medium-sized ones to those in the strength of their years, and the little ones to old people. Yet even children and young people often have only a small light. Show me my life." "Light," said the physician, believing that it must still be tall and strong. Death pointed to a little stump that was already flickering and about to go out. "There it is," he said. The physician was horrified. "Dear Godfather," he cried, "light a new one for me. Do it as a favor, so that I may enjoy my life, become king, and be the husband of the beautiful princess." "I cannot," answered Death calmly. "One light must go out before another can be lit." "Then place the old one onto a new one," begged the physician, "so that it may continue burning after this one is finished." Death pretended to grant his wish. He took hold of a large new candle and lifted it as if to set the old one upon it. But because he desired revenge, he deliberately made a mistake. The little piece fell down, went out, and the flame was extinguished. At that very instant, the physician fell to the ground. His life was over, and he too was now in the hands of Death. The Four Skillful Brothers. There was once a poor man who had 4 sons. He had brought them up with care and affection, yet as the years passed and the boys grew to manhood, his means did not increase with his family. One day, when he had long considered the matter in his heart, he called his sons before him and spoke plainly, though not without sorrow. "My dear children," said he, "you must now go out into the world. I have nothing to give you, neither gold nor land, and if you remain here, you will learn nothing but poverty. Set out. Go some distance from home, and each of you learn a trade that you may see how you can make your own way." The sons listened in silence, for they knew their father spoke the truth. Though it grieved them to leave him, they also felt the stir of youth within them, and the desire to test themselves in the wide world. They took their walking sticks, bade their father farewell with tears and good wishes, and passed together through the town gate. For a time they journeyed along the same road, speaking of what might lie before them. At length they came to a crossway where 4 roads branched off in different directions. There the eldest brother stopped and said, "Here we must part. Let each of us go his own way, and on this day 4 years from now we shall meet again at this very place. Until then, We will seek our fortunes and learn what we can." The others agreed, and after embracing one another, each chose a road and went on alone. The eldest brother had not gone far when he met a man who asked him where he was going and what he intended to do. "I wish to learn a trade," he replied, "so that I may earn my bread." The man looked at him keenly and said, "Then come with me and become a thief." The young man drew back. "No," said he, "that is no honorable calling. It leads only to the gallows." "Oh," answered the stranger, "you need not fear that. I shall teach you to take only such things as no other man could lay hold of, and no one will ever detect you." After much persuasion, the youth allowed himself to be talked into it. He stayed with the man and learned his craft so thoroughly that he became an accomplished thief, so quick and dexterous that nothing was safe from him once he desired to possess it. The second brother went his way and soon met a man who put to him the same question. "I do not yet know what I wish to learn," said the youth. "Then come with me," said the man, "and become an astronomer. There is nothing better than that, for nothing remains hidden from one who understands the heavens." The thought pleased the young man. He studied diligently and learned all that his master could teach him. When he was ready to depart, the master gave him a telescope and said, "With this you can see whatever takes place on earth or in the sky. Nothing will be concealed from you." The third brother encountered a huntsman who took him into his service and trained him in everything that belonged to the chase. The youth proved apt and tireless, and soon became a skillful hunter. When he left, his master gave him a gun and said, "This will never fail you. Whatever you aim at, you are certain to hit." The youngest brother also met a man who asked him his intentions. "Would you not like to be a tailor?" said he. "Not that I know of," replied the youth. "Sitting bent over from morning till night, pushing needle and goose back and forth, is not to my taste." But the man laughed and said, "You speak in ignorance. With me, you will learn a very different kind of tailoring, respectable and proper, and for the most part, honorable." The youth allowed himself to be persuaded and learned the craft from the beginning. When they parted, the man gave him a needle and said, "With this, you can sew together whatever is given you, whether it be as soft as an egg or as hard as steel, and it shall become one piece without any seam showing." When the 4 years had passed, the brothers arrived at the crossroads at the same hour. They recognized one another, at once embraced with joy, and returned together to their father. "So," said he gladly, "the wind has blown you back to me again." They told him all that had happened and what each had learned. They were sitting before the house beneath a great tree when the father said, "I will put you to the test and see what you can do." Looking up, he said to the second son, "Between 2 branches at the top of this tree is a chaffinch's nest. Tell me how many eggs are in it." The astronomer raised his telescope, looked carefully, and said, "There are 5. Then the father said to the eldest, "Fetch the eggs down without disturbing the bird that is sitting on them." The thief climbed swiftly and took the eggs from beneath the bird so lightly that she did not notice, and remained sitting quietly. He brought them down to his father, who placed one at each corner of the table, and the 5th in the middle. "To you now," said the father to the huntsman, "with one shot you shall split all 5 eggs through the middle." The huntsman took aim and fired. All 5 eggs were divided exactly as ordered. "Now, it is your turn," said the father to the youngest. "Sew the eggs together again, and the young birds within them also, so that they are not harmed." The tailor took his needle and sewed them so skillfully that no crack could be seen. The thief then carried them back to the nest without the bird being aware. She sat her full time, and when the young ones crept out, each bore a fine red line around its neck where it had been sewn. "Well said," the father, "you have used your time well. Which of you deserves the most praise I cannot yet say. That will be shown when you are given a true occasion to use your talents." Not long after, a great uproar arose in the land, for the king's daughter had been carried off by a dragon. The king caused it to be proclaimed that whoever brought her back should have her for wife. The 4 brothers said to one another, "This is our opportunity," and resolved to go together. "I shall soon know where she is," said the astronomer, and looking through his telescope added, "She is on a rock in the sea, and the dragon is beside her." The astronomer at once went before the king and told him what he had seen. When the king heard that his daughter was alive and knew where she was held, hope returned to his heart. He ordered a ship to be prepared without delay and granted it to the 4 brothers that they might set out together upon the sea. They embarked and sailed for many days, guided by the knowledge of the second brother, until at last they reached the place he had described. There, rising lonely from the water, stood a great rock washed on all sides by the waves. Upon it sat the king's daughter, pale and weary, and beside her lay the dragon, with his monstrous body coiled around her as though he claimed her for his own. His eyes were closed, and his breath rose and fell heavily, for he was asleep. The brothers watched from a distance and took counsel together. "I dare not fire," said the huntsman, "for my shot might strike the maiden as well as the monster." Then the eldest brother spoke. "I will try my art," said he. "If I can take her from the dragon without waking him, all will be well." He crept forward with such quietness that even the wind could scarcely have been more silent. Step by step he approached the rock, and with careful hands he lifted the maiden away from the dragon's side. The creature stirred not at all, but continued to snore, while the thief bore the king's daughter back to the ship as lightly as though she were a shadow. When she stood safely among them, the brothers rejoiced and hastened to put out to sea. But the dragon soon awoke and found the place beside him empty. With a terrible roar, he rose into the air and followed after the ship, breathing fire and smoke. He circled above them, ready to descend and destroy them all. Then the huntsman took his gun, steadied himself, and aimed carefully. With one shot he struck the dragon through the heart. The monster fell dead, but so huge and heavy was his body that when it struck the sea, the force of his fall shattered the ship into fragments. The brothers and the maiden were thrown into the water and would surely have perished had they not quickly seized hold of floating planks. The waves carried them far apart, and once more they were in great peril. But the youngest brother did not lose his presence of mind. Taking his wondrous needle, he began to sew the planks together, stitch by stitch, until they formed a raft upon which all could sit. He then gathered the broken pieces of the ship and joined them so skillfully that in a short time the vessel was made whole again and fit to sail. Thus they were saved and brought safely back to land. When the king saw his daughter once more, there was great rejoicing throughout the kingdom. He embraced her with tears of joy and thanked the four brothers warmly. Then he said, "One of you shall have my daughter for wife. Decide among yourselves which of you it shall be." At once a dispute arose, for each believed his service the greatest. The astronomer said, "If I had not discovered where the princess was, none of you would have known where to seek her." The thief answered, "Of what use would that have been had I not stolen her from beneath the dragon?" The huntsman said, "Without my shot, the dragon would have destroyed you all." And the tailor said, "Had I not mended the ship, you would all have drowned." The king listened to them and considered their words. At last he said, "Each of you has an equal claim. Since all cannot have the maiden, none of you shall have her. Instead, I will give to each of you half a kingdom." The brothers were content with this judgment, for they valued peace among themselves more than a crown. Thus each received his reward, and they lived with their father in happiness for the rest of their days, as long as it pleased God. When the king had spoken his judgment, the matter was settled. The four brothers stood before him in silence, and though each had put forward his own claim, none disputed the decision. Each knew that without the others, his own skill would have been of no avail. Thus they accepted the king's word as just. The king then commanded that his promise should be fulfilled. To each of the brothers he granted half a kingdom, and he caused the gifts to be set down plainly, so that no doubt or dispute might arise afterward. Though it was an unusual reward, the king held to it firmly, for he judged that equality was better than strife. The princess was restored to her former place, and the joy of her return spread throughout the land. As for the brothers, they took their leave of the king and set out to return to their father, for they did not forget the man who had first sent them into the world with nothing but good counsel. When the old man saw his sons again, he rejoiced greatly. They told him all that had befallen them from the day they parted at the crossroads to the rescue of the king's daughter and the judgment that followed. The father listened and said, "You have used your time well, and each of you has learned something good." The brothers remained together and lived near their father. Each possessed his own share of the king's gift. Yet they did not fall into disagreement, for they remembered how their different skills had once been joined in a single task. They met often, and when they spoke of their past, they did so without pride. People spoke much of the four brothers and of the strange arts they had learned, of the thief whose hand no one could detect, of the astronomer who saw what was hidden, of the huntsman whose shot never failed, and of the tailor whose needle could join what seemed impossible to mend. Yet those who understood the matter said that it was not the skills alone that brought them good fortune, but the way they had used them together. Thus the brothers lived with their father in peace and contentment, and no misfortune befell them. And so they lived in the greatest happiness as long as it pleased God. The two kings' children. There was once on a time a king who had a little boy of whom it had been foretold that he should be killed by a stag when he was 16 years of age. And when he had reached that age, the huntsman once went hunting with him. In the forest, the king's son was separated from the others, and all at once he saw a great stag, which he wanted to shoot, but could not hit. At length, he chased the stag so far that they were quite out of the forest, and then suddenly a great tall man was standing there instead of the stag and said, "It is well that I have thee. I have already ruined 6 pairs of glass skates with running after thee, and have not been able to get thee." Then he took the king's son with him and dragged him through a great lake to a great palace, and then he had to sit down to table with him and eat something. When they had eaten something together, the king said, "I have 3 daughters. Thou must keep watch over the eldest for one night, from 9 in the evening till 6 in the morning, and every time the clock strikes, I will come myself and call, and if thou then givest me no answer tomorrow morning, thou shalt be put to death. But if thou always givest me an answer, thou shalt have her to wife." When the young folks went to the bedroom, there stood a stone image of Saint Christopher, and the king's daughter said to it, "My father will come at 9 o'clock, and every hour till it strikes 3. When he calls, give him an answer instead of the king's son." Then the stone image of Saint Christopher nodded its head quite quickly, and then more and more slowly, till at last it stood still. The next morning the king said to him, "Thou hast done the business well, but I cannot give my daughter away. Thou must now watch a night by my second daughter, and then I will consider with myself whether thou canst have my eldest daughter to wife, but I shall come every hour myself. And when I call thee, answer me, and if I call thee, and thou dost not reply, thy blood shall flow." Then they both went into the sleeping room, and there stood a still larger stone image of Saint Christopher, and the king's daughter said to it, "If my father calls, do you answer him?" Then the great stone image of Saint Christopher again nodded its head quite quickly, and then more and more slowly, until at last it stood still again, and the king's son lay down on the threshold, put his hand under his head, and slept. The next morning the king said to him, "Thou hast done the business really well, but I cannot give my daughter away. Thou must now watch a night by the youngest princess, and then I will consider with myself whether thou canst have my second daughter to wife. But I shall come every hour myself, and when I call thee, answer me. And if I call thee, and thou answerest not, thy blood shall flow for me." Then they once more went to the sleeping room together, and there was a much greater and much taller image of Saint Christopher than the 2 first had been. The king's daughter said to it, "When my father calls, do thou answer." Then the great tall stone image of Saint Christopher nodded quite half an hour with its head, until at length the head stood still again, and the king's son laid himself down on the threshold of the door and slept. The next morning the king said, "Thou hast indeed watched well, but I cannot give thee my daughter now. I have a great forest. If thou cuttest it down for me between 6 o'clock this morning and 6 at night, I will think about it." Then he gave him a glass axe, a glass wedge, and a glass mallet. When he got into the wood, he began at once to cut, but the axe broke in 2. Then he took the wedge and struck it once with the mallet, and it became as short and as small as sand. Then he was much troubled and believed he would have to die, and sat down and wept. Now, when it was noon, the king said, "One of you girls must take him something to eat." "No," said the two eldest, "we will not take it to him. The one by whom he last watched can take him something." Then the youngest was forced to go and take him something to eat. When she got into the forest, she asked him how he was getting on. "Oh," said he, "I am getting on very badly." Then she said he was to come and just eat a little. "Nay," said he, "I cannot do that. I shall still have to die, so I will eat no more." Then she spoke so kindly to him and begged him just to try that he came and ate something. When he had eaten something, she said, "I will comb thy hair a while, and then thou wilt feel happier." So she combed his hair, and he became weary and fell asleep. And then she took her handkerchief and made a knot in it and struck it 3 times on the earth and said, "Earth workers, come forth." In a moment, numbers of little earthmen came forth and asked what the king's daughter commanded. Then said she, "In 3 hours' time, the great forest must be cut down and the whole of the wood laid in heaps." So the little earthmen went about and got together the whole of their kindred to help them with the work. They began at once, and when the 3 hours were over, all was done, and they came back to the king's daughter and told her so. Then she took her white handkerchief again and said, "Earth workers, go home." On this, they all disappeared. When the king's son awoke, he was delighted, and she said, "Come home when it has struck 6 o'clock." He did as she told him, and then the king asked, "Hast thou made away with the forest?" "Yes," said the king's son. When they were sitting at table, the king said, "I cannot yet give thee my daughter to wife. Thou must still do something more for her sake." So he asked what it was to be. Then, "I have a great fish pond," said the king. "Thou must go to it tomorrow morning and clear it of all mud until it is as bright as a mirror, and fill it with every kind of fish." The next morning, the king gave him a glass shovel and said, "The fish pond must be done by 6 o'clock." So he went away, and when he came to the fish pond, he stuck his shovel in the mud, and it broke in 2. Then he stuck his hoe in the mud and broke it also. Then he was much troubled. At noon, the youngest daughter brought him something to eat and asked him how he was getting on. So the king's son said everything was going very ill with him, and he would certainly have to lose his head. "My tools have broken to pieces again." "Oh," said she, "thou must just come and eat something, and then thou wilt be in another frame of mind." "No," said he, "I cannot eat. I am far too unhappy for that." Then she gave him many good words, until at last he came and ate something. Then she combed his hair again, and he fell asleep. So once more she took her handkerchief, tied a knot in it, and struck the ground thrice with the knot, and said, "Earth workers, come forth." In a moment a great many little earthmen came and asked what she desired, and she told them that in 3 hours' time they must have the fish pond entirely cleaned out, and it must be so clear that people could see themselves reflected in it, and every kind of fish must be in it. The little earthmen went away and summoned all their kindred to help them, and in 2 hours it was done. Then they returned to her and said, "We have done as thou hast commanded." The king's daughter took the handkerchief and once more struck thrice on the ground with it, and said, "Earth workers, go home again." Then they all went away. When the king's son awoke, the fish pond was done. Then the king's daughter went away also, and told him that when it was 6, he was to come to the house. When he arrived at the house, the king asked, "Hast thou got the fish pond done?" "Yes," said the king's son. That was very good. When they were again sitting at table, the king said, "Thou hast certainly done the fish pond, but I cannot give thee my daughter yet. Thou must just do one thing more." "What is that then?" asked the king's son. The king said he had a great mountain on which there was nothing but briars which must all be cut down, and at the top of it the youth must build up a great castle, which must be as strong as could be conceived, and all the furniture and fittings belonging to a castle must be inside it. And when he arose next morning, the king gave him a glass axe and a glass gimlet with him, and he was to have all done by 6 o'clock. As he was cutting down the first briar with the axe, it broke off short and so small that the pieces flew all round about, and he could not use the gimlet either. Then he was quite miserable, and waited for his dearest to see if she would not come and help him in his need. When it was midday, she came and brought him something to eat. He went to meet her, and told her all, and ate something, and let her comb his hair, and fell asleep. Then she once more took the knot and struck the earth with it, and said, "Earth workers, come forth." Then came once again numbers of earth men, and asked what her desire was. Then said she, "In the space of 3 hours they must cut down the whole of the briars, and a castle must be built on the top of the mountain that must be as strong as anyone could conceive, and all the furniture that pertains to a castle must be inside it." They went away and summoned their kindred to help them, and when the time was come, all was ready. Then they came to the king's daughter and told her so, and the king's daughter took her handkerchief and struck thrice on the earth with it, and said, "Earth workers, go home," on which they all disappeared. When therefore the king's son awoke and saw everything done, he was as happy as a bird in air. When it had struck 6, they went home together. Then said the king, "Is the castle ready?" "Yes," said the king's son. When they sat down to table, the king said, "I cannot give away my youngest daughter until the 2 eldest are married." Then the king's son and the king's daughter were quite troubled, and the king's son had no idea what to do. But he went by night to the king's daughter and ran away with her. When they had got a little distance away, the king's daughter peeped round and saw her father behind her. "Oh," said she, "what are we to do? My father is behind us and will take us back with him. I will at once change thee into a briar and myself into a rose, and I will shelter myself in the midst of the bush." When the father reached the place, there stood a briar with 1 rose on it. Then he was about to gather the rose when the thorn came and pricked his finger, so that he was forced to go home again. His wife asked why he had not brought their daughter back with him. So he said he had nearly got up to her, but that all at once he had lost sight of her, and a briar with 1 rose was growing on the spot. Then said the queen, "If thou hadst but gathered the rose, the briar would have been forced to come too." So he went back again to fetch the rose, but in the meantime the 2 were already far over the plain, and the king ran after them. Then the daughter once more looked round and saw her father coming, and said, "Oh, what shall we do now? I will instantly change thee into a church, and myself into a priest, and I will stand up in the pulpit and preach." When the king got to the place, there stood a church, and in the pulpit was a priest preaching. So he listened to the sermon, and then went home again. Then the queen asked why he had not brought their daughter with him. And he said, "Nay, I ran a long time after her, and just as I thought I should soon overtake her, a church was standing there, and a priest was in the pulpit preaching." "Thou shouldst just have brought the priest," said his wife, "and then the church would soon have come. It is no use to send thee, I must go there myself." When she had walked for some time, and could see the two in the distance, the king's daughter peeped round and saw her mother coming, and said, "Now we are undone, for my mother is coming herself. I will immediately change thee into a fish pond, and myself into a fish." When the mother came to the place, there was a large fish pond, and in the midst of it a fish was leaping about and peeping out of the water, and it was quite merry. She wanted to catch the fish, but she could not. Then she was very angry and drank up the whole pond in order to catch the fish, but it made her so ill that she was forced to vomit, and vomited the whole pond out again. Then she cried, "I see very well that nothing can be done now," and said that now they might come back to her. Then the king's daughter went back again, and the queen gave her daughter 3 walnuts, and said, "With these thou canst help thyself when thou art in thy greatest need." So the young folks went once more away together, and when they had walked quite 10 miles, they arrived at the castle from whence the king's son came, and close by it was a village. When they reached it, the king's son said, "Stay here, my dearest, I will just go to the castle, and then will I come with a carriage and with attendants to fetch thee." When he got to the castle, they all rejoiced greatly at having the king's son back again, and he told them he had a bride who was now in the village, and they must go with the carriage to fetch her. Then they harnessed the horses at once, and many attendants seated themselves outside the carriage. When the king's son was about to get in, his mother gave him a kiss, and he forgot everything which had happened, and also what he was about to do. On this, his mother ordered the horses to be taken out of the carriage again, and everyone went back into the house. But the maiden sat in the village and watched, and thought he would come and fetch her. But no one came. Then the king's daughter took service in the mill which belonged to the castle, and was obliged to sit by the pond every afternoon and clean the tubs. And the queen came one day on foot from the castle, and went walking by the pond, and saw the well-grown maiden sitting there, and said, "What a fine, strong girl that is! She pleases me well." Then she and all with her looked at the maid, but no one knew her. So a long time passed by, during which the maiden served the miller honorably and faithfully. In the meantime, the queen had sought a wife for her son, who came from quite a distant part of the world. When the bride came, they were at once to be married, and many people hurried together, all of whom wanted to see everything. Then the girl said to the miller that he might be so good as to give her leave to go also. So the miller said, "Yes, do go there." When she was about to go, she opened one of the 3 walnuts, and a beautiful dress lay inside it. She put it on and went into the church and stood by the altar. Suddenly came the bride and bridegroom and seated themselves before the altar. And when the priest was just going to bless them, the bride peeped half round and saw the maiden standing there. Then she stood up again and said she would not be given away until she also had as beautiful a dress as that lady there. So they went back to the house again, and sent to ask the lady if she would sell that dress. No, she would not sell it, but the bride might perhaps earn it. Then the bride asked her how she was to do this. Then the maiden said if she might sleep one night outside the king's son's door, the bride might have what she wanted. So the bride said, yes, she was willing to do that. But the servants were ordered to give the king's son a sleeping drink, and then the maiden laid herself down on the threshold and lamented all night long. She had had the forest cut down for him. She had had the fish pond cleaned out for him. She had had the castle built for him. She had changed him into a briar and then into a church and at last into a fish pond, and yet he had forgotten her so quickly. The king's son did not hear one word of it, but the servants had been awakened and had listened to it and had not known what it could mean. The next morning when they were all up, the bride put on the dress and went away to the church with the bridegroom. In the meantime, the maiden opened the second walnut, and a still more beautiful dress was inside it. She put it on and went and stood by the altar in the church, and everything happened as it had happened the time before. And the maiden again lay all night on the threshold which led to the chamber of the king's son, and the servant was once more to give him a sleeping drink. The servant, however, went to him and gave him something to keep him awake. And then the king's son went to bed, and the miller's maiden bemoaned herself as before on the threshold of the door, and told of all that she had done. All this the king's son heard and was sore troubled, and what was past came back to him. Then he wanted to go to her, but his mother had locked the door. The next morning, however, he went at once to his beloved and told her everything which had happened to him, and prayed her not to be angry with him for having forgotten her. Then the king's daughter opened the third walnut, and within it was a still more magnificent dress, which she put on and went with her bridegroom to church. And numbers of children came who gave them flowers and offered them gay ribbons to bind about their feet. And they were blessed by the priest and had a merry wedding. But the false mother and the bride had to depart, and the mouth of the person who last told all this is still warm. The Six Swans. Once on a time, a king was hunting in a great wood, and he pursued a wild animal so eagerly that none of his people could follow him. When evening came, he stood still, and looking round him, he found that he had lost his way, and seeking a path, he found none. Then all at once he saw an old woman with a nodding head coming up to him, and it was a witch. "My good woman," said he, "can you show me the way out of the wood?" "Oh yes, my lord king," answered she, "certainly I can. But I must make a condition, and if you do not fulfill it, you will never get out of the wood again, but die there of hunger." "What is the condition?" asked the king. "I have a daughter," said the old woman, "who is as fair as any in the world, and if you will take her for your bride and make her queen, I will show you the way out of the wood." The king consented because of the difficulty he was in, and the old woman led him into her little house, and there her daughter was sitting by the fire. She received the king just as if she had been expecting him, and though he saw that she was very beautiful, she did not please him, and he could not look at her without an inward shudder. Nevertheless, he took the maiden before him on his horse, and the old woman showed him the way, and soon he was in his royal castle again, where the wedding was held. The king had been married before, and his first wife had left 7 children, 6 boys, and 1 girl, whom he loved better than all the world. And as he was afraid the stepmother might not behave well to them, and perhaps would do them some mischief, he took them to a lonely castle standing in the middle of a wood. There they remained hidden, for the road to it was so hard to find that the king himself could not have found it had it not been for a clue of yarn possessing wonderful properties that a wise woman had given him. When he threw it down before him, it unrolled itself and showed him the way. And the king went so often to see his dear children that the queen was displeased at his absence, and she became curious and wanted to know what he went out into the wood for so often alone. She bribed his servants with much money, and they showed her the secret and told her of the clue of yam which alone could point out the way. Then she gave herself no rest until she had found out where the king kept the clue. And then she made some little white silk shirts and sewed a charm in each, as she had learned witchcraft of her mother. And once, when the king had ridden to the hunt, she took the little shirts and went into the wood, and the clue of yarn showed her the way. The children, seeing someone in the distance, thought it was their dear father coming to see them, and came jumping for joy to meet him. Then the wicked queen threw over each one of the little shirts, and as soon as the shirts touched their bodies, they were changed into swans and flew away through the wood. So the queen went home, very pleased to think she had got rid of her stepchildren. But the maiden had not run out with her brothers, and so the queen knew nothing about her. The next day, the king went to see his children, but he found nobody but his daughter. "Where are thy brothers?" asked the king. "Ah, dear father," answered she, "they are gone away and have left me behind." And then she told him how she had seen from her window her brothers in the guise of swans fly away through the wood, and she showed him the feathers which they had let fall in the courtyard and which she had picked up. The king was grieved, but he never dreamt that it was the queen who had done this wicked deed, and as he feared lest the maiden also should be stolen away from him, he wished to take her away with him. But she was afraid of the stepmother, and begged the king to let her remain one more night in the castle in the wood. Then she said to herself, "I must stay here no longer, but go and seek for my brothers." And when the night came, she fled away and went straight into the wood. She went on all that night and the next day until she could go no longer for weariness. At last she saw a rude hut, and she went in and found a room with 6 little beds in it. She did not dare to lie down in one, but she crept under one and lay on the hard boards and wished for night. When it was near the time of sunsetting, she heard a rustling sound and saw 6 swans come flying in at the window. They alighted on the ground and blew at one another until they had blown all their feathers off, and then they stripped off their swan skin as if it had been a shirt. And the maiden looked at them and knew them for her brothers, and was very glad and crept from under the bed. The brothers were not less glad when their sister appeared, but their joy did not last long. "You must not stay here," said they to her. "This is a robber's haunt, and if they were to come and find you here, they would kill you." "And cannot you defend me?" asked the little sister. "No," answered they, "for we can only get rid of our swan skins and keep our human shape every evening for a quarter of an hour. But after that, we must be changed again into swans." Their sister wept at hearing this and said, "Can nothing be done to set you free?" "Oh, no," answered they, "the work would be too hard for you. For 6 whole years you would be obliged never to speak or laugh, and make during that time 6 little shirts out of aster flowers. If you were to let fall a single word before the work was ended, all would be of no good." And just as the brothers had finished telling her this, the quarter of an hour came to an end, and they changed into swans and flew out of the window. But the maiden made up her mind to set her brothers free, even though it should cost her her life. She left the hut, and going into the middle of the wood, she climbed a tree, and there passed the night. The next morning she set to work, and gathered asters, and began sewing them together. As for speaking, there was no one to speak to, and as for laughing, she had no mind to it. So she sat on and looked at nothing but her work. When she had been going on like this for a long time, it happened that the king of that country went a-hunting in the wood, and some of his huntsmen came up to the tree in which the maiden sat. They called out to her, saying, "Who art thou?" But she gave no answer. "Come down," cried they, "we will do thee no harm." But she only shook her head, and when they tormented her further with questions, she threw down to them her gold necklace, hoping they would be content with that. But they would not leave off, so she threw down to them her girdle, and when that was no good, her garters, and one after another everything she had on and could possibly spare, until she had nothing left but her smock. But all was no good. The huntsmen would not be put off any longer, and they climbed the tree, carried the maiden off, and brought her to the king. The king asked, "Who art thou? What wert thou doing in the tree?" But she answered nothing. He spoke to her in all the languages he knew, but she remained dumb. But being very beautiful, the king inclined to her, and he felt a great love rise up in his heart towards her. And casting his mantle round her, he put her before him on his horse, and brought her to his castle. Then he caused rich clothing to be put upon her, and her beauty shone as bright as the morning, but no word would she utter. He seated her by his side at table, and her modesty and gentle mien so pleased him that he said, "This maiden I choose for wife, and no other in all the world." And accordingly, after a few days, they were married. But the king had a wicked mother who was displeased with the marriage and spoke ill of the young queen. "Who knows where the maid can have come from?" said she, "and not able to speak a word. She is not worthy of a king." After a year had passed, and the queen brought her first child into the world, the old woman carried it away and marked the queen's mouth with blood as she lay sleeping. Then she went to the king and declared that his wife was an eater of human flesh. The king would not believe such a thing, and ordered that no one should do her any harm. And the queen went on quietly sewing the shirts and caring for nothing else. The next time that a fine boy was born, the wicked stepmother used the same deceit. But the king would give no credence to her words, for he said, "She is too tender and good to do any such thing, and if she were only not dumb and could justify herself, then her innocence would be as clear as day." When for the third time the old woman stole away the newborn child and accused the queen, who was unable to say a word in her defense, the king could do no other but give her up to justice, and she was sentenced to suffer death by fire. The day on which her sentence was to be carried out was the very last one of the 6th year of the years, during which she had neither spoken nor laughed to free her dear brothers from the evil spell. The 6 shirts were ready, all except one which wanted the left sleeve. And when she was led to the pile of wood, she carried the 6 shirts on her arm. And when she mounted the pile and the fire was about to be kindled all at once, she cried out aloud, for there were 6 swans coming flying through the air, and she saw that her deliverance was near, and her heart beat for joy. The swans came close up to her with rushing wings and stooped round her so that she could throw the shirts over them. And when that had been done, the swanskins fell off them, and her brothers stood before her in their own bodies, quite safe and sound. But as one shirt wanted the left sleeve, so the youngest brother had a swan's wing instead of a left arm. They embraced and kissed each other, and the queen went up to the king, who looked on full of astonishment, and began to speak to him, and to say, "Dearest husband, now I may dare to speak and tell you that I am innocent and have been falsely accused." And she related to him the treachery of the stepmother, who had taken away the 3 children and hidden them. And she was reconciled to the king with great joy, and the wicked stepmother was bound to the stake on the pile of wood and burnt to ashes. And the king and queen lived many years with their 6 brothers in peace and joy. The Griffin. There was once upon a time a king, but where he reigned, and what he was called, I do not know. He had no son, but an only daughter who had always been ill, and no doctor had been able to cure her. Then it was foretold to the king that his daughter should eat herself well with an apple. So he ordered it to be proclaimed throughout the whole of his kingdom that whosoever brought his daughter an apple with which she could eat herself well should have her to wife and be king. This became known to a peasant who had 3 sons, and he said to the eldest, "Go out into the garden and take a basket full of those beautiful apples with the red cheeks and carry them to the court. Perhaps the king's daughter will be able to eat herself well with them, and then thou wilt marry her and be king." The lad did so and set out. When he had gone a short way, he met a little iron man who asked him what he had there in the basket, to which replied Ule, for so was he named Frog's Legs. On this the little man said, "Well, so shall it be and remain," and went away. At length Uela arrived at the palace and made it known that he had brought apples which would cure the king's daughter if she ate them. This delighted the king hugely, and he caused Uela to be brought before him. But alas, when he opened the basket, instead of having apples in it, he had frogs' legs which were still kicking about. On this the king grew angry and had him driven out of the house. When he got home, he told his father how it had fared with him. Then the father sent the next son, who was called Sime, but all went with him just as it had gone with Uele. He also met the little iron man, who asked what he had there in the basket. "Sime said, 'Hog's bristles.' And the iron man said, 'Well, so shall it be and remain.' When Sama got to the king's palace and said he brought apples with which the king's daughter might eat herself well, they did not want to let him go in, and said that one fellow had already been there and had treated them as if they were fools. Sime, however, maintained that he certainly had the apples, and that they ought to let him go in. At length they believed him and led him to the king. But when he uncovered the basket, he had but hog's bristles. This enraged the king most terribly, so he caused Sem to be whipped out of the house. When he got home, he related all that had befallen him. Then the youngest boy, whose name was Hans, but who was always called Stupid Hans, came and asked his father if he might go with some apples. "Oh," said the father, "thou wouldst be just the right fellow for such a thing. If the clever ones can't manage it, what canst thou do?" The boy, however, did not believe him, and said, "Indeed, father, I wish to go." "Just get away, thou stupid fellow. Thou must wait till thou art wiser," said the father to that, and turned his back. Hans, however, pulled at the back of his smock frock and said, "Indeed, father, I wish to go." "Well, then, so far as I am concerned, thou mayest go, but thou wilt soon come home again," replied the old man in a spiteful voice. The boy, however, was tremendously delighted and jumped for joy. "Well, act like a fool, thou growest more stupid every day," said the father again. Hans, however, did not care about that and did not let it spoil his pleasure. But as it was then night, he thought he might as well wait until the morrow, for he could not get to court that day. All night long he could not sleep in his bed, and if he did doze for a moment, he dreamt of beautiful maidens, of palaces of gold and of silver, and all kind of things of that sort. Early in the morning he went forth on his way, and directly afterwards the little shabby-looking man in his iron clothes came to him and asked what he was carrying in the basket. Hans gave him the answer that he was carrying apples with which the king's daughter was to eat herself well. "Then," said the little man, "so shall they be and remain." But at the court they would none of them let Hans go in, for they said two had already been there who had told them that they were bringing apples, and one of them had frog's legs and the other hog's bristles. Hans, however, resolutely maintained that he most certainly had no frog's legs, but some of the most beautiful apples in the whole kingdom. As he spoke so pleasantly, the doorkeeper thought he could not be telling a lie, and asked him to go in. And he was right, for when Hans uncovered his basket in the king's presence, golden yellow apples came tumbling out. The king was delighted, and caused some of them to be taken to his daughter, and then waited in anxious expectation until news should be brought to him of the effect they had. But before much time had passed by, news was brought to him. But who do you think it was who came? It was his daughter herself. As soon as she had eaten of those apples, she was cured and sprang out of her bed. The joy the king felt cannot be described, but now he did not want to give his daughter in marriage to Hans, and said he must first make him a boat, which would go quicker on dry land than on water. Hans agreed to the conditions, and went home and related how it had fared with him. Then the father sent Uela into the forest to make a boat of that kind. He worked diligently and whistled all the time. At midday, when the sun was at the highest, came the little iron man and asked what he was making. Uela gave him for answer wooden bowls for the kitchen. The iron man said, "So it shall be and remain." By evening, Uela thought he had now made the boat, but when he wanted to get into it, he had nothing but wooden bowls. The next day, Sama went into the forest, but everything went with him just as it had done with Uela. On the third day, stupid Hans went. He worked away most industriously, so that the whole forest resounded with the heavy strokes, and all the while he sang and whistled right merrily. At midday, when it was the hottest, the little man came again and asked what he was making. "A boat which will go quicker on dry land than on the water," replied Hans, "and when I have finished it, I am to have the king's daughter for my wife." "Well," said the little man, "such an one shall it be and remain." In the evening, when the sun had turned into gold, Hans finished his boat and all that was wanted for it. He got into it and rowed to the palace. The boat went as swiftly as the wind. The king saw it from afar, but would not give his daughter to Hans yet, and said he must first take 100 hares out to pasture from early morning until late evening, and if one of them got away, he should not have his daughter. Hans was contented with this, and the next day went with his flock to the pasture, and took great care that none of them ran away. Before many hours had passed, came a servant from the palace and told Hans that he must give her a hare instantly, for some visitors had come unexpectedly. Hans, however, was very well aware what that meant, and said he would not give her one. The king might set some hare soup before his guest next day. The maid, however, would not believe in his refusal, and at last she began to get angry with him. Then Hans said that if the king's daughter came herself, he would give her a hare. The maid told this in the palace, and the daughter did go herself. In the meantime, however, the little man came again to Hans and asked him what he was doing there. He said he had to watch over 100 hares and see that none of them ran away, and then he might marry the king's daughter and be king. "Good," said the little man. "There is a whistle for thee, and if one of them runs away, just whistle with it, and then it will come back again." When the king's daughter came, Hans gave her a hare into her apron. But when she had gone about 100 steps with it, he whistled, and the hare jumped out of the apron, and before she could turn round, was back to the flock again. When the evening came, the hare herd whistled once more and looked to see if all were there, and then drove them to the palace. The king wondered how Hans had been able to take 100 hares to graze without losing any of them. He would, however, not give him his daughter yet, and said he must now bring him a feather from the griffin's tail. Hans set out at once and walked straight forwards. In the evening he came to a castle, and there he asked for a night's lodging, for at that time there were no inns. The lord of the castle promised him that with much pleasure, and asked where he was going. Hans answered, "To the Griffin." "Oh, to the Griffin. They tell me he knows everything, and I have lost the key of an iron money chest. So you might be so good as to ask him where it is." "Yes, indeed," said Hans. "I will do that." Early the next morning he went onwards, and on his way arrived at another castle, in which he again stayed the night. When the people who lived there learned that he was going to the Griffin, they said they had in the house a daughter who was ill, and that they had already tried every means to cure her, but none of them had done her any good, and he might be so kind as to ask the Griffin what would make their daughter healthy again. Hans said he would willingly do that, and went onwards. Then he came to a lake, and instead of a ferry boat, a tall man was there, who had to carry everybody across. The man asked Hans whither he was journeying. "To the Griffin," said Hans. "Then when you get to him," said the man, "just ask him why I am forced to carry everybody over the lake." "Yes, indeed, most certainly I'll do that," said Hans. Then the man took him up on his shoulders and carried him across. At length Hans arrived at the Griffin's house, but the wife only was at home, and not the Griffin himself. Then the woman asked him what he wanted. Thereupon he told her everything, that he had to get a feather out of the Griffin's tail, and that there was a castle where they had lost the key of their money chest, and he was to ask the Griffin where it was, that in another castle the daughter was ill, and he was to learn what would cure her. And then not far from thence there was a lake, and a man beside it, who was forced to carry people across it, and he was very anxious to learn why the man was obliged to do it. Then said the woman, "But look here, my good friend, no Christian can speak to the Griffin. He devours them all. But if you like, you can lie down under his bed, and in the night, when he is quite fast asleep, you can reach out and pull a feather out of his tail. And as for those things which you are to learn, I will ask about them myself." Hans was quite satisfied with this and got under the bed. In the evening, the Griffin came home, and as soon as he entered the room, said, "Wife, I smell a Christian." "Yes," said the woman, "one was here today, but he went away again." And on that, the Griffin said no more. In the middle of the night, when the Griffin was snoring loudly, Hans reached out and plucked a feather from his tail. The Griffin woke up instantly and said, "Wife, I smell a Christian, and it seems to me that somebody was pulling at my tail." His wife said, "Thou hast certainly been dreaming, and I told thee before that a Christian was here today, but that he went away again. He told me all kinds of things, that in one castle they had lost the key of their money chest and could find it nowhere." "Oh, the fools," said the Griffin. "The key lies in the wood house under a log of wood behind the door." And then he said that in another castle the daughter was ill, and they knew no remedy that would cure her. "Oh, the fools," said the Griffin. "Under the cellar steps a toad has made its nest of her hair, and if she got her hair back, she would be well." And then he also said that there was a place where there was a lake and a man beside it who was forced to carry everybody across. "Oh, the fool," said the Griffin. "If he only put one man down in the middle, he would never have to carry another across." Early the next morning, the Griffin got up and went out. Then Hans came forth from under the bed, and he had a beautiful feather, and had heard what the Griffin had said about the key and the daughter and the ferryman. The Griffin's wife repeated it all once more to him, that he might not forget it, and then he went home again. First, he came to the man by the lake, who asked him what the Griffin had said. But Hans replied that he must first carry him across, and then he would tell him. So the man carried him across. And when he was over, Hans told him that all he had to do was to set one person down in the middle of the lake, and then he would never have to carry over any more. The man was hugely delighted and told Hans that out of gratitude he would take him once more across and back again. But Hans said no, he would save him the trouble. He was quite satisfied already, and pursued his way. Then he came to the castle where the daughter was ill. He took her on his shoulders, for she could not walk, and carried her down the cellar steps and pulled out the toad's nest from beneath the lowest step and gave it into her hand. And she sprang off his shoulder and up the steps before him, and was quite cured. Then were the father and mother beyond measure rejoiced, and they gave Hans gifts of gold and of silver, and whatsoever else he wished for, that they gave him. And when he got to the other castle, he went at once into the wood house, and found the key under the log of wood behind the door, and took it to the lord of the castle. He also was not a little pleased, and gave Hans as a reward much of the gold that was in the chest, and all kinds of things, besides such as cows and sheep and goats. When Hans arrived before the king with all these things, with the money and the gold and the silver and the cows, sheep, and goats, the king asked him how he had come by them. Then Hans told him that the Griffin gave everyone whatsoever he wanted, So the king thought he himself could make such things useful and set out on his way to the Griffin. But when he got to the lake, it happened that he was the very first to arrive there after Hans, and the man put him down in the middle of it and went away, and the king was drowned. Hans, however, married the daughter and became king. The Wolf and the Man. Once on a time, the fox was talking to the wolf of the strength of man, how no animal could withstand him, and how all were obliged to employ cunning in order to preserve themselves from him. Then the wolf answered, "If I had but the chance of seeing a man for once, I would set on him notwithstanding." "I can help thee to do that," said the fox. "Come to me early tomorrow morning, and I will show thee one." The wolf presented himself betimes, and the fox took him out on the road by which the huntsman went daily. First came an old, discharged soldier. "Is that a man?" inquired the wolf. "No," answered the fox, "that was one." Afterwards came a little boy who was going to school. "Is that a man?" "No, that is going to be one." At length came a hunter with his double-barreled gun at his back and hanger by his side. Said the fox to the wolf, "Look, there comes a man, thou must attack him, but I will take myself off to my hole." The wolf then rushed on the man. When the huntsman saw him, he said, "It is a pity that I have not loaded with a bullet, aimed and fired his small shot in his face." The wolf pulled a very wry face, but did not let himself be frightened, and attacked him again, on which the huntsman gave him the second barrel. The wolf swallowed his pain and rushed on the huntsman, but he drew out his bright hanger and gave him a few cuts with it right and left, so that bleeding everywhere he ran, howling back to the fox. "Well, brother wolf," said the fox, "how hast thou got on with man?" "Ah," replied the wolf, "I never imagined the strength of man to be what it is. First he took a stick from his shoulder and blew into it, and then something flew into my face, which tickled me terribly. Then he breathed once more into the stick, and it flew into my nose like lightning and hail. When I was quite close, he drew a white rib out of his side, and he beat me so with it that I was all but left lying dead." "See what a braggart thou art," said the fox. "Thou throwest thy hatchet so far that thou canst not fetch it back again." The Death of the Little Hen. Once upon a time, the little hen went with the little cock to the nut hill, and they agreed together that whichsoever of them found a kernel of a nut should share it with the other. Then the hen found a large nut, but said nothing about it, intending to eat the kernel herself. The kernel, however, was so large that she could not swallow it, and it remained sticking in her throat, so that she was alarmed lest she should be choked. Then she cried, "Cock, I entreat thee to run as fast thou canst and fetch me some water, or I shall choke." The little cock did run as fast as he could to the spring, and said, "Stream thou art to give me some water. The little hen is lying on the nut hill, and she has swallowed a large nut and is choking." The well answered, "First run to the bride and get her to give thee some red silk." The little cock ran to the bride and said, "Bride, you are to give me some red silk. I want to give red silk to the well is to give me some water. I am to take the water to the little hen who is lying on the nut hill and has swallowed a great nut kernel and is choking with it." The bride answered, "First run and bring me my little wreath which is hanging to a willow." So the little cock ran to the willow and drew the wreath from the branch and took it to the bride, and the bride gave him some water for it. Then the little cock took the water to the hen, But when he got there, the hen had choked in the meantime and lay there dead and motionless. Then the cock was so distressed that he cried aloud, and every animal came to lament the little hen, and 6 mice built a little carriage to carry her to her grave. And when the carriage was ready, they harnessed themselves to it, and the cock drove. On the way, however, they met the fox, who said, "Where art thou going, little cock?" "I am going to bury my little hen. May I drive with thee?" "Yes, but seat thyself at the back of the carriage, for in the front my little horses could not drag thee." Then the fox seated himself at the back, and after that the wolf, the bear, the stag, the lion, and all the beasts of the forest did the same. Then the procession went onwards, and they reached the stream. "How are we to get over?" said the little cock. A straw was lying by the stream, and it said, "I will lay myself across, and you shall drive over me." But when the 6 mice came to the bridge, the straw slipped and fell into the water, and the 6 mice all fell in and were drowned. Then they were again in difficulty, and a coal came and said, "I am large enough. I will lay myself across, and you shall drive over me." So the coal also laid itself across the water, but unhappily just touched it, on which the coal hissed, was extinguished, and died. When a stone saw that it took pity on the little cock, wished to help him, and laid itself over the water. Then the cock drew the carriage himself, but when he got it over and reached the other shore with the dead hen, and was about to draw over the others who were sitting behind as well, there were too many of them. The carriage ran back, and they all fell into the water together and were drowned. Then the little cock was left alone with the dead hen, and dug a grave for her, and laid her in it, and made a mound above it, on which he sat down and fretted until he died too, and then everyone was dead. The crystal ball. There was once an enchantress who had 3 sons who loved each other as brothers. But the old woman did not trust them, and thought they wanted to steal her power from her. So she changed the eldest into an eagle, which was forced to dwell in the Rocky Mountains, and was often seen sweeping in great circles in the sky. The second she changed into a whale which lived in the deep sea, and all that was seen of it was that it sometimes spouted up a great jet of water in the air. Each of them only bore his human form for only 2 hours daily. The third son, who was afraid she might change him into a raging wild beast, a bear perhaps, or a wolf, went secretly away. He had heard that a king's daughter who was bewitched was imprisoned in the castle of the Golden Sun and was waiting for deliverance. Those, however, who tried to free her risked their lives. 23 youths had already died a miserable death, and now only one other might make the attempt, after which no more must come. And as his heart was without fear, he caught at the idea of seeking out the castle of the Golden Sun. He had already traveled about for a long time without being able to find it, when he came by chance into a great forest and did not know the way out of it. All at once he saw in the distance 2 giants, who made a sign to him with their hands. And when he came to them, they said, "We are quarreling about a cap, and which of us it is to belong to. And as we are equally strong, neither of us can get the better of the other. The small men are cleverer than we are, so we will leave the decision to thee." "How can you dispute about an old cap?" said the youth. "Thou dost not know what properties it has. It is a wishing cap. Whosoever puts it on can wish himself away wherever he likes, and in an instant he will be there." "Give me the cap," said the youth. "I will go a short distance off, and when I call you, you must run a race, and the cap shall belong to the one who gets first to me." He put it on and went away, and thought of the king's daughter, forgot the giants, and walked continually onward. At length he sighed from the very bottom of his heart, and cried, "Ah, if I were but at the castle of the golden sun," and hardly had the words passed his lips than he was standing on a high mountain before the gate of the castle. He entered and went through all the rooms until in the last he found the king's daughter. But how shocked he was when he saw her! She had an ashen gray face full of wrinkles, blear eyes, and red hair. "Are you the king's daughter whose beauty the whole world praises?" cried he. "Ah," she answered, "this is not my form. Human eyes can only see me in this state of ugliness. But that thou mayest know what I am like, look in the mirror. It does not let itself be misled. It will show thee my image as it is in truth." She gave him the mirror in his hand, and he saw therein the likeness of the most beautiful maiden on earth, and saw too how the tears were rolling down her cheeks with grief. Then said he, "How canst thou be set free? I fear no danger." She said, "He who gets the crystal ball and holds it before the enchanter will destroy his power with it, and I shall resume my true shape." "Ah," she added, "so many have already gone to meet death for this, and thou art so young. I grieve that thou shouldst encounter such great danger." "Nothing can keep me from doing it," said he, "but tell me what I must do." "Thou shalt know everything," said the king's daughter. "When thou descendest the mountain on which the castle stands, a wild bull will stand below by a spring, and thou must fight with it. And if thou hast the luck to kill it, a fiery bird will spring out of it, which bears in its body a burning egg, and in the egg the crystal ball lies like a yolk. The bird will not, however, let the egg fall until forced to do so, and if it falls on the ground, it will flame up and burn everything that is near, and melt even ice itself, and with it the crystal ball, and then all thy trouble will have been in vain." The youth went down to the spring, where the bull snorted and bellowed at him. After a long struggle, he plunged his sword in the animal's body, and it fell down. Instantly, a fiery bird arose from it, and was about to fly away, but the young man's brother, the eagle, who was passing between the clouds, swooped down, hunted it away to the sea, and struck it with his beak, until in its extremity it let the egg fall. The egg did not, however, fall into the sea, but on a fisherman's hut, which stood on the shore, and the hut began at once to smoke, and was about to break out in flames. Then arose in the sea waves, as high as a house. They streamed over the hut, and subdued the fire. The other brother, the whale, had come swimming to them, and had driven the water up on high. When the fire was extinguished, the youth sought for the egg, and happily found it. It was not yet melted, but the shell was broken by being so suddenly cooled with the water, and he could take out the crystal ball unhurt. When the youth went to the enchanter and held it before him, the latter said, "My power is destroyed, and from this time forth thou art the king of the castle of the golden sun. With this canst thou likewise give back to thy brothers their human form." Then the youth hastened to the king's daughter, and when he entered the room, she was standing there in the full splendor of her beauty, and joyfully they exchanged rings with each other. Tom Thumb. There was once a poor countryman who used to sit in the chimney corner all evening and poke the fire while his wife sat at her spinning wheel. And he used to say, "How dull it is without any children about us. Our house is so quiet, and other people's houses so noisy and merry." "Yes," answered his wife, and sighed. "If we could only have one, and that one ever so little, no bigger than my thumb, how happy I should be. It would indeed be having our heart's desire." Now it happened that after a while the woman had a child who was perfect in all his limbs, but no bigger than a thumb. Then the parent said, "He is just what we wished for, and we will love him very much." And they named him, according to his stature, Tom Thumb. And though they gave him plenty of nourishment, he grew no bigger, but remained exactly the same size as when he was first born. And he had very good faculties, and was very quick and prudent, so that all he did prospered. One day his father made ready to go into the forest to cut wood, and he said as if to himself, "Now I wish there was someone to bring the cart to meet me." "Oh, father," cried Tom Thumb, "I can bring the cart. Let me alone for that, and in proper time too." Then the father laughed and said, "How will you manage that? You are much too little to hold the reins." "That has nothing to do with it, father. While my mother goes on with her spinning, I will sit in the horse's ear and tell him where to go." "Well," answered the father, "we will try it for once." When it was time to set off, the mother went on spinning after setting Tom Thumb in the horse's ear, and so he drove off crying, "Gee up, gee woe." So the horse went on quite as if his master were driving him, and drew the wagon along the right road to the wood. Now it happened just as they turned a corner, and the little fellow was calling out, "Gee up," that two strange men passed by. "Look," said one of them, "how is this? There goes a wagon, and the driver is calling to the horse, and yet he is nowhere to be seen." "It is very strange," said the other. "We will follow the wagon and see where it belongs." And the wagon went right through the wood up to the place where the wood had been hewed. When Tom Thumb caught sight of his father, he cried out, "Look, father, here am I with the wagon. Now take me down." The father held the horse with his left hand, and with the right he lifted down his little son out of the horse's ear, and Tom Thumb sat down on a stump, quite happy and content. When the two strangers saw him, they were struck dumb with wonder. At last, one of them, taking the other aside, said to him, "Look here, the little chap would make our fortune if we were to show him in the town for money. Suppose we buy him." So they went up to the woodcutter and said, "Sell the little man to us. We will take care he shall come to no harm." "No," answered the father, "he is the apple of my eye, and not for all the money in the world would I sell him." But Tom Thumb, when he heard what was going on, climbed up by his father's coat-tails, and perching himself on his shoulder, he whispered in his ear, "Father, you might as well let me go. I will soon come back again." Then the father gave him up to the two men for a large piece of money. They asked him where he would like to sit. "Oh, put me on the brim of your hat," said he. "There I can walk about and view the country and be in no danger of falling off." So they did as he wished, and when Tom Thumb had taken leave of his father, they set off all together. And they traveled on until it grew dusk, and the little fellow asked to be set down a little while for a change, and after some difficulty they consented. So the man took him down from his hat and set him in a field by the roadside, and he ran away directly, and after creeping about among the furrows, he slipped suddenly into a mouse hole, just what he was looking for. "Good evening, my masters. You can go home without me," cried he to them, laughing. They ran up and felt about with their sticks in the mouse hole, but in vain. Tom Thumb crept farther and farther in, and as it was growing dark, they had to make the best of their way home, full of vexation and with empty purses. When Tom Thumb found they were gone, he crept out of his hiding place underground. "It is dangerous work groping about these holes in the darkness," said he. "I might easily break my neck." But by good fortune, he came upon an empty snail shell. "That's all right," said he. "Now I can get safely through the night." And he settled himself down in it. Before he had time to get to sleep, he heard two men pass by, and one was saying to the other, "How can we manage to get hold of the rich parson's gold and silver?" "I can tell you how," cried Tom Thumb. "How is this?" said one of the thieves, quite frightened. "I hear someone speak." So they stood still and listened, and Tom Thumb spoke again. "Take me with you. I will show you how to do it." "Where are you then?" asked they. "Look about on the ground and notice where the voice comes from," answered he. At last they found him and lifted him up. "You little elf," said they, "how can you help us?" "Look here," answered he. "I can easily creep between the iron bars of the parson's room and hand out to you whatever you would like to have." "Very well," said they, "we will try what you can do." So when they came to the parsonage house, Tom Thumb crept into the room, but cried out with all his might, "Will you have all that is here?" So the thieves were terrified and said, "Do speak more softly, lest anyone should be awaked." But Tom Thumb made as if he did not hear them, and cried out again, "What would you like? Will you have all that is here?" So that the cook, who was sleeping in a room hard by, heard it and raised herself in bed and listened. The thieves, however, in their fear of being discovered, had run back part of the way. But they took courage again, thinking that it was only a jest of the little fellows. So they came back and whispered to him to be serious and to hand them out something. Then Tom Thumb called out once more, as loud as he could, "Oh yes, I will give it all to you, only put out your hands." Then the listening maid heard him distinctly that time, and jumped out of bed and burst open the door. The thieves ran off as if the wild huntsman were behind them, but the maid, as she could see nothing, went to fetch a light. And when she came back with one, Tom Thumb had taken himself off without being seen by her into the barn. And the maid, when she had looked in every hole and corner and found nothing, went back to bed at last, and thought that she must have been dreaming with her eyes and ears open. So Tom Thumb crept among the hay and found a comfortable nook to sleep in, where he intended to remain until it was day, and then to go home to his father and mother. But other things were to befall him. Indeed, there is nothing but trouble and worry in this world. The maid got up at dawn of day to feed the cows. The first place she went to was the barn, where she took up an armful of hay, and it happened to be the very heap in which Tom Thumb lay asleep. And he was so fast asleep that he was aware of nothing and never waked until he was in the mouth of the cow, who had taken him up with the hay. "Oh dear," cried he, "how is it that I have got into a mill?" But he soon found out where he was, and he had to be very careful not to get between the cow's teeth, and at last he had to descend into the cow's stomach. "The windows were forgotten when this little room was built," said he, "and the sunshine cannot get in. There is no light to be had." His quarters were in every way unpleasant to him, and what was the worst, new hay was constantly coming in, and the space was being filled up. At last he cried out in his extremity as loud as he could, "No more hay for me, no more hay for me." The maid was then milking the cow, and as she heard a voice, but could see no one, and as it was the same voice that she had heard in the night, she was so frightened that she fell off her stool and spilt the milk. Then she ran in great haste to her master, crying, "Oh, master dear, the cow spoke." "You must be crazy," answered her master, and he went himself to the cow-house to see what was the matter. No sooner had he put his foot inside the door than Tom Thumb cried out again, "No more hay for me, no more hay for me." Then the parson himself was frightened, supposing that a bad spirit had entered into the cow, and he ordered her to be put to death. So she was killed, but the stomach where Tom Thumb was lying was thrown upon a dunghill. Tom Thumb had great trouble to work his way out of it, and he had just made a space big enough for his head to go through when a new misfortune happened. A hungry wolf ran up and swallowed the whole stomach at one gulp. But Tom Thumb did not lose courage. "Perhaps," thought he, "the wolf will listen to reason." And he cried out from the inside of the wolf, "My dear wolf, I can tell you where to get a splendid meal." "Where is it to be had?" asked the wolf. "In such and such a house, and you must creep into it through the drain, and there you will find cakes and bacon and broth, as much as you can eat." And he described to him his father's house. The wolf needed not to be told twice. He squeezed himself through the drain in the night and feasted in the storeroom to his heart's content. When at last he was satisfied, he wanted to go away again, but he had become so big that to creep the same way back was impossible. This Tom Thumb had reckoned upon, and began to make a terrible din inside the wolf, crying and calling as loud as he could. "Will you be quiet?" said the wolf. "You will wake the folks up." "Look here," cried the little man, "you are very well satisfied, and now I will do something for my own enjoyment," and began again to make all the noise he could. At last the father and mother were awakened, and they ran to the room door and peeped through the chink, and when they saw a wolf in occupation, they ran and fetched weapons, the man an axe, and the wife a "Stay behind," said the man as they entered the room. "When I have given him a blow, and it does not seem to have killed him, then you must cut at him with your scythe." Then Tom Thumb heard his father's voice and cried, "Dear father, I am here in the wolf's inside." Then the father called out full of joy, "Thank heaven that we have found our dear child," and told his wife to keep the scythe out of the way, lest Tom Thumb should be hurt with it. Then he drew near and struck the wolf such a blow on the head that he fell down dead, and then he fetched a knife and a pair of scissors, slit up the wolf's body, and let out the little fellow. "Oh, what anxiety we have felt about you," said the father. "Yes, father, I have seen a good deal of the world, and I am very glad to breathe fresh air again." "And where have you been all this time?" asked his father. "Oh, I have been in a mouse hole, and a snail shell in a cow's stomach, and a wolf's inside now. I think I will stay at home." "And we will not part with you for all the kingdoms of the world," cried the parents as they kissed and hugged their dear little Tom Thumb, and they gave him something to eat and drink and a new suit of clothes, as his old ones were soiled with travel.